Okay, now we're recording. All right, tomorrow question.
All right. So my question is about, I guess, entertainment and consuming entertainment.
Okay.
And specifically, I guess, and also other kinds of media where most things have some sort of mix and of good and bad, let's say.
Yeah.
And let's say you're spending a certain amount of your time consuming media, right? Books and movies, and also let's say news and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So my question is certain things are maybe definitely bad, and it's definitely a good idea to censor your consumption of them, right?
Yeah.
And then there's more gray area stuff, and there's also, I would say, both content and themes / life philosophies that can be embedded in things. And so I guess my question is how do you navigate censoring bad stuff out of what you consume?
That's a good question. So I actually want to, that actually parallels a question that Nava sent me. And I just want to actually read her question. This was for the Q&A, but she wasn't able to make it. Let's see. Nava said, and by the way, I did write down your question. Nava said, is it okay to listen to music about faith and belief, yet is not related to Judaism specifically? There is some music I really enjoy listening to, but has a more Christian connotation to it. I don't listen to anything that explicitly goes into the Christian belief, though there is definitely still the implication of that Jesus is our savior and Christ is coming and all of that jazz, which is, I think we are all familiar with the category, you know? Yeah, so I think this is so when we say content and entertainment, I'm going to expand that to include art, music, shows, anything that you do for pleasure that is for the sake of just enjoyment. Is that a fair way to frame your question, or is your question more specific about?
Yeah, no, it's that. I feel like I also sometimes run into this when I'm reading different kinds of more serious written pieces by people who have different philosophies also, but that may be a separate side question.
Right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that is a separate question. Okay, so I'm going to actually do something which I gave a shir on in Lomdeha on November 18th, 2020, which is going over the Rambam on music. Okay, on listening to non-Jewish music, and let's use that as a basis for mapping out an answer to the question. Okay, so there's a full shir. Actually, there's two full shirim on this, but I just want to read the sources. So this is on Avos 1:17. Okay, so he says, I say that speech should be divided. So this is the context is the Mishnah Avos says that lo matasi tov leguf elashtika, that I didn't find anything better for the body than silence, which might carry over into next week's Pirkei Avos shir about siag lechachma shtika, offense for chachma is silence, but we'll see. So he says there's 5 categories: commanded, prohibited, objectionable, desirable, and permissible. Okay. So he explains now. The first category is commanded, namely studying Torah, teaching it, and analyzing its explanation. This is a positive commandment with which we were commanded, as it is stated, you shall speak of them, and it is a mitzvah like any other. So much has already been stated urging us to learn Torah that this treatise cannot contain even a part of it. The second category is speech which is prohibited and which we are cautioned against, such as false testimony, lying, gossip, tale-bearing, and blasphemy. And there are many verses in the Torah which refer to this category. Included in this is Lashon hara and nivel peh, which is inappropriate speech, usually like sexual stuff. Okay, then here's where we're going to be focusing on objectionable. The third category is objectionable speech, which is speech that has no benefit for the person himself, neither in relation to obedience nor rebellion, such as the majority of the conversation. Oh, this is not, or whatever, such as, no, this is maybe not what we're talking about. Well, maybe, I don't know. Such as the majority of the conversations of the masses, what happened, what was, how such and such a king behaves in his palace, or modern day example is celebrity gossip, and what caused the death of so-and-so and the wealth of so-and-so. The sages call this sicha betela, idle chatter. Those who are pious would strive exceedingly to distance themselves from these statements. It is said of Rav, the student of Reb Chia, that he never engaged in sicha betela in his life. Similarly, included in this category is where a person disparages a virtue or praises a vice, whether moral or intellectual. So that's a little bit different. The first category is just like waste of time. Second category is you are promoting bad values. Okay. The fourth category, and I think he's going to elaborate on that. The fourth category is desirable speech, namely speaking in praise of intellectual and moral virtues or disparaging vices in these same 2 categories and arousing the soul in these ways with sayings and songs and distancing the soul from them through these same means. Similarly, praising the wise and telling of the greatness of their virtues in order to make their conduct beloved in people's eyes so that they follow in their ways, and degrading the wicked and their vices in order to make their actions and their memory despicable in people's eyes so that they avoid them and don't follow in their ways. This category, meaning to say learning the noble attributes and removing from the base attributes, would be termed derech eretz. And then the fifth category is the permissible, which is speech that pertains to a person's business, livelihood, food, drink, clothing, and his other needs. This is permissible in that it is neither desirable nor objectionable. Rather, if a person desires, he may speak of this as much as he wants, and if he desires, he may be silent from it. It is regarding this category that minimization of a person's speech is preferable. In other words, he'll say, the books of Musar caution us against excess in this type of speech, but regarding prohibited and objectionable speech, there is no need to say or command us, for it is appropriate to be utterly silent from it. Okay, so those are the 5 categories. Okay, so any questions on the categories before we go into Rambam's answer to tomorrow's question? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so then he says, actually, this part I want to save for Thursday. Okay. All right, now songs, music. He says, no, this is the same Rambam. You should know that songs, regardless of the language in which they are composed, should only be evaluated by their content. One should apply to them the divisions of speech we have explained. I needed to clarify this, even though it is obvious, because I have seen great, quote unquote, and pious, quote unquote. Obviously, there were no quotation marks back then, but you'll see. I've seen great and pious men from our nation who, if they happen to be at a party or a wedding or something like that, and a person wants to sing a song in the Arabic language, even if that song praises courage or generosity and is in the category of desirable speech, or if it praises wine, okay, which I think he does not mean praises drunkenness. I think he means like it's like neutral, you know, or praises like, I don't know, like a creation of God. I'm not sure, but he's definitely saying not praising drunkenness. These men object with all types of objection, and they don't permit it to be heard. But if the singer would sing any of the Hebrew songs, then they don't object, and the matter is not difficult in their eyes, even though the statements in that song belong to the category of the prohibited or the objectionable. This is absolute stupidity, for speech is not prohibited or permissible or desirable or objectionable or commanded to say based on the language in which it is said, but based on its content. If the theme of a song is something virtuous, one should sing it no matter what language it's in, and if its theme is a vice, then one should refrain from it no matter what language it's in. But in my opinion, according to my opinion, it should be added that if there are 2 songs which, for example, share the theme of arousing the soul to physical desires and drawing the soul after it, which I'm sure a lot of music does nowadays, which is a vice, and is in the category of objectionable speech, since it arouses and moves a person to an inferior trait, as has been made clear from words in the 4th chapter, and one of the songs is Hebrew and the other is in Arabic or Farsi, then listening to the Hebrew one talking about it is more objectionable according to the Torah due to the holiness of the language, which should only be used for exalted matters. This is even more so if the Hebrew song utilizes a pasuk from Torah or Shir Shirim, in which case that song has moved from the category of the objectionable into the category of the prohibited, since the Torah prohibits making prophetic speech into types of music about vices and lowly matters. Okay, so that's a separate issue of using psukim. So to summarize here, he's saying that, I'm just going to write this down in the sources so I don't forget, Rambam Avos 1:17. So he's saying that if you think about these 5 categories, you should maximize mitzvah speech and virtuous speech or noble speech, and then absolutely avoid objectionable speech and prohibited speech. And then neutral is the area that you should you can speak in, but you should diminish. But then with songs, he's saying that everything is based on the content and how it's going to affect you. So if it's usher, you certainly can't do it at all. But if it's going to be affecting you, then that's really the question we have to ask about here. So applying to these criteria to your question, in entertainment, okay, there are certain things that are usher to partake of, okay, whether it be because of, like isurim about like certain, sexual things, like watching or fantasizing about certain sexual things, or avodah zara, there's al tifnu al ha'alilim and los asura achar levavchem acharei nechem, which have to do with like exposing yourself to things that might lead you to deny the ikarim or to question the ikarim. So those would be usher. And then there's other things which contain objectionable content, and there the question has to be like, that's not usher but objectionable, that it like promotes bad vices, and the question there has to be, how are you engaging in that thing? Like in a couple of summers, then Rabbi Moskowitz did short stories. We read short stories, fiction stories, and then learned Mishlei ideas from them. So that's very different than a person reading them, and like I don't know, satisfying some sort of fantasy by engaging in them. And even that's going to differ based on the person, like certain people are very prone to getting like vicarious pleasure and enjoyment out of like, the entertainment that they watch, and other people are capable of like compartmentalizing or separating it. And truth is, like, it's, once you're out of the realm of halacha and you're in the realm of perfection, it's very, very, very individualistic and very, very difficult to make a determination. A lot has to do with the frequency, it has to do with the mood that you're in. Two people, you can watch the same movie and in one setting be entertained and like use it as, a means of thinking about stuff. In another case, you could use it purely as an escape. Another place you could use it as like an unhealthy escape, where you're like identifying with the characters and like it's making you unhappy about your own life, or like making you envy the wicked. So like it's very, very, I don't want to say subjective. It's very relative and individualistic. I don't know if there are any like set criteria. And same thing with like Nava's question. I don't think that that, let's say, for example, songs that have Jesus-y vibes, there's Jesus-y vibes in general about like God is good, but like that they're talking about a different God, and I don't know if that's us or not. Let's assume that it's not us. So there's a difference between that and let's say you have a song about God loving you, okay? And let's say the idea of God loving you is a Christian idea of God loving you, not an idea of like Ahavas Olam, Ahavtanu, and God loving, Klal Yisrael. So that could be a much more subtle thing that like, if you're listening to these things, it's going to subtly shape the way that you relate to God, So I wish I knew specific criteria, but I think that those are 5 useful criteria, or that quintuple criteria is good for like applying to questions like this. What do you say? I mean, not just you, but like anyone,
I have some, I guess, follow-up thoughts, questions, whatever.
Yeah.
I feel like, okay, so, I mean, this makes sense that it's like an individual judgment. And I guess, I find, I guess, that it's hard to sometimes make a decision, like a sort of like a game time decision. Like, I was watching a movie that ended up having a bunch of like, I think this actually was probably a problem. I don't know, or you could argue that this is a problem because it had like an actual Avodah Zarah. Some of the characters ended up doing like some pagan thing in the movie. It's like, so then, I mean, I don't know. I guess like, I won't watch that movie again, but I didn't really like it. So it was fine, but it's sort of like, if there's some like movie or book that you like, and then you think about it and you're like, that really has like a problematic theme or content, let's say.
Right. So again, here,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't.
I guess the question is like about, okay, so there's like one thing, which is like, how do you evaluate the content of something to decide whether or not like this is a thing I'm going to like crack down on and not consume or get involved in.
Right.
And then, which is, involving personal reflection and how it's affecting you and things like that. And also, I guess maybe, how bad is the actual bad thing in the content?
Yeah.
But also like, if you're enjoying something, maybe for reasons that don't have to do, like this movie had like it was like set in Japan and there were some people doing some sort of shrine thing in the movie. So, but let's say you like the movie for some other reason that doesn't have to do with the shrine thing, then like, is it advisable, I guess, to like not watch certain movies that you like because of this? And like, how would you make that call, I guess? Question.
Okay. So before I address that particular question, I just want to address your example. Even something like watching a movie that involves Avodah Zarah, that can be done in a way that is bad for your midas and your soul, or it could be for for the good. For example, this Rashi on hold on, let me close this Rambam thing. This Rashi on the pasuk in Dvarim Yud Ches Tes, which I wrote down on my sources here. Ki ata ba el haaretz asher ad Hashem elokecha nosen lach. When you come into the land that Hashem your God gives you, lo silmud la'asos kesoavos hagoyim hayim. Do not learn to do in accordance with the abominations of these goyim. And he gives examples of all the superstitious Avodah Zarah stuff. Okay, so you would think that, oh, you're not allowed to learn, but then Rashi says, lo simod lasos lamed lahavinu lahoros. You can learn in order to understand and to instruct. So what does that mean? Lahavin ma'asehim kama hein mekukalin, to understand their actions, how corrupt they are, meaning to understand like the degradation and corruption and falsehood of Avodah Zarah. and like why it's appealing and how that can affect a person if they believe in it. And also to instruct your children, saying, don't do this, because this is a statute of the goyim. And I don't think he just means there, like, I mean, of course he means like actually being able to identify what is a practice of avodah zarah, like, you know, like you should be able to know, and I'm not saying that it is or it isn't, is, you know, dancing around bonfires on Lag BaOmer a chok avodah zarah, is making shliso challah a chok avodah zarah, you know, and like some of these things, like a red string actually is avodah zarah, you know, and that comes from the you know, the chukos of these actual goyim that Moshe is talking about, you know. So he definitely means that, but also just to pick up on the derech avodah zarah. You know, there's a phrase that the Rishonim use of, it has like a shemetz avodah zarah, like a tinge of avodah zarah, you know, and you know, we practically hold, at least you know, it's a halach l'maisa for some people. I don't know who holds it, that if there's like a ritualistic or customary thing that has no practical purpose, then halachically we assume it's chukos hagoyim, you know. So there's a certain intuition you can develop about when something is an avodah zarah type practice. So I would say, let's say you're watching this movie and it suddenly devolves into some Shinto, you know, Japanese ritual. So if you are enamored by it or curious about it or drawn into it, and it's appealing to that emotional, imaginative part of you, so then maybe that is halachically prohibited. But if you're understanding, okay, what is the appeal in this, and how does this, you know, like I'm reading this book called Japanese Death Poems, and it's about these poems. It's a collection of poems that were written when Japanese people, usually monks or samurai, were on their, like, about to die. They would like write these poems, and a lot of them reflect ideas about the afterlife. And I find myself reading this and thinking like, wow, like, you know, this is giving me insight into a lot of stuff about people's belief in mortality, immortality, and what the soul is, and like fantasies about death and how they relate to their life. And like, it's giving me a lot of like actual insight, you know, because I'm choosing to engage in it in that way. So even in a situation like you were describing, then there's still room for saying that it might be like a mutter and like praiseworthy. Okay.
I think also the older and the more mature, the more you're attracted to wisdom,
right,
the better off you'll be.
Definitely, right. That there's definitely an argument for keeping people away from these types of things when they're younger, or someone who happens to be a very, like, I don't know, like imaginative, you know, youth, and they're easily taken in and believing things that are, you know, in the reality of things because they're exposed to them in these media. But then your question about how to engage in it in terms of like a developmental stance, I don't know how many guidelines there are. I mean, one is being honest and watching what's going on inside of you and seeing where it's coming from, you know, but only that even that could get you so far, you know, that can only get you so far. I don't know. It's a tough question. You know, like, let's go with the example of the Jesus Love You song, you know, like if a person finds themselves listening to it because they like the music, that's one thing. If they find themselves deriving comfort from it, maybe that is something that they should stay away from, you know, or if they find themselves like, you know, I don't know, yearning, like, let's say someone's listening to gospel, right? I'm not saying that that's mutter, but let's say you're listening to gospel and you find yourself longing to worship God in that way, saying like, well, why don't we have things like that in our religion? That might also be, you know, damaging, because it's you know, it's causing you to have a negative outlook towards tefillah, you know, or that might be a prompt to say, well, how can I level up my tefillah? It's so individualistic. I don't know what guidelines I can give. I can think about it, but that's what I got for now.
That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Good question. All right. Next question. Yeah, Ayala.
Okay, so I guess my question is, to what extent is it our responsibility, if it is at all, to correct or discuss with people when they seem to be saying things which, like, I guess are mistaken or wrong, and how to go about doing that, and when to go about doing that?
Okay, good question. I'm going to pause the recording for 1 second while I just look for a source, just to stop the time. Okay, so let me share the screen. Okay, so Gemara in Yevmot, which says, so this is about tochacha. Okay, and I realize tochacha is a more specific thing than what you're asking about, but I think that this principle still applies. V'amar Rabbi Eli mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon kashem shemitzvah al adam lomar davar hanishma kach mitzvah shelo al adam shelo lomar davar she'eno nishma. Just as it is a mitzvah upon a person to say something that will be heard. Okay. Rashi says, "Dichsiv hocheach tochiach lahochiach mi shemakabel himenu." Right? It's saying you should rebuke someone who's going to accept it. Kach mitzvah al ha'adam shelo lomar davar she'eino nishma. So too, it's a mitzvah upon a person to not say something that will not be listened to. So I think the Lashon is very interesting because it's not saying that you're only obligated to rebuke when they're going to listen. It's saying that just like you're obligated to rebuke when they listen, you're also commanded to not rebuke when they won't listen. Okay, how do we know this? Rabbi Abba Omer Chova. That's interesting. Is that a machlokas? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that right. I forgot this Gemara. He says, so he says it's a chova to not speak. Okay, shenemar al tochach let penis na eka hochech lachacham v'yehavecha. Don't rebuke a scoffer lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man and he will love you. Okay, so let's look at this Meiri that apparently I found very valuable. If it's here. Okay, you know what? I'm just going. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Even though it is said that you should rebuke a member of your nation, even 100 times. You're specifically obligated to do this when you know that they will accept it, or in a general case. If you don't know whether they will accept it or not. But if you know they won't accept it, then you're not obligated in it. Adraba, to the contrary, mushar hu shelo lahashlich pninav lefanav o lifnehem. It's better that you don't throw your pearls in front of them. Okay, before him or before them. V'husha amru kishim she'adam mitzvah lomar al davar lomar davar hanishma kach mitzvah shelo lomar davar she'eno nishma shnemar al tochech leitz penis na'acha. Yeah, is that the end of the Meiri? Yeah. Okay. Right. So that's like my measure. Okay. Is that like if it all has to depend on your assessment of how likely your words are to be heeded. And it doesn't mean like that they're going to like hearing what you say, but like that they're going to be receptive to it, and it really is, I mean, he doesn't say this, and the Gemara doesn't say this, but it's really like part of the Ahavta L'Recha Kamocha, that like, if this person is operating under some mistake, whether it's a mistake in halacha or a mistake in ideas or a mistake in, they're doing something bad, and you have the ability to remove them from that error and set them on the good track, then it would really be like, it wouldn't be right to withhold it, So that's my general approach. But if you have follow-ups or particulars, then I'll try to address that.
Yeah, so I guess one question is that, like, let's say they may listen to this thing, but it will, like, everything you say to someone, I guess, affects your relationship going forward, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that definitely also needs to be taken into account, even though, again, this is my own answer. The Meiri doesn't say this. I had a policy, which officially was my policy in Shalhevet as well, but for some reason, it didn't come up as much as it has in other teaching circumstances for me, is that I would not comment at all on any student's halachic practice, and I, look, there are definitely rebbeim and I'm sure, female teachers in high schools that like will, like, I don't know, like will call out their students and tell them when they're violating halacha, that they, and try to like correct them for that. And I didn't do that. And the reason why I didn't do that is because I knew that it was better for their long-term development to have a Rebbe that they felt was not judging them or trying to change them, and that would allow them to be more receptive to ideas. And in the long game, then that was a better policy for me, So I do think that needs to be taken into account. Like, let's say you have a friend who's like always making bad decisions, and you need to like. So there you need to choose your battles, like, like only bring up something that is going, you don't want to be in a relationship where you're constantly nagging the person, So, that needs to be taken into account. Or let's say like you have a friend who's becoming more religious, and let's say they even tell you, oh, please point out to me anything I'm doing halachically that's like not correct. Let's say like, that they're doing a lot and it's going to overwhelm them. You need to take that into account. So I would say that, yeah, the relationship is equally a part of the communication here.
and this is also specifically like right now we're talking specifically about like rebuking someone, I guess, but is there a difference of like discussing like I guess more philosophical ideas or like ideas about Torah or mistaken beliefs about Torah?
Yeah, I think in my mind it's the same thing, even if halakhically it didn't come under the heading of rebuke, and the reason why is because the Rambam in Tשובה, what was I, hold on a second, I gotta remember to do this. Meiri Yevamos 65b. Okay, and then Rambam Tשובה Daled Aleph, I think. Let's find out. So this is in the parak about things that prevent, that withhold tshuva, that like hold back tshuva, that they impede tshuva. That's what I'm looking for. So he says esrim v'arba dvarim me'akvin es tshuva. So there are 24 things that impede tshuva. They don't prevent it entirely, but they impede it. Arba mehen avon gadol v'hosei echad me'arba'atan ein hakadosh baruch hu maspik biyado lasos tshuva lefi godol chato. 4 of them are things that if you do them, God does not provide the assistance or does not provide what you need in order to be able to do tshuva due to the enormity of your sin. Veilheim, here they are. Hamachtias harabim, one who causes the masses to sin. Same thing, someone who prevents the majority of the masses from doing a mitzvah. 2, hamate chavero miderech tova l'derech ra'a, kikon hamesis umediach, someone who turns his friend from the good path to the bad path, like someone who incites someone to do avodah zarah. 3, haroi beno betarbus ra'av eno mamach biyado. If you see your son who's hanging out with a bad crowd and you don't object. Since your son is in your dominion, ilu micha bo hayaporish. If you were to rebuke him, he would separate from this group. V'nimsa kamachti. So it's like you're causing him to sin. Uvichlal avonzeh, here's the part included in this: kol she'efshar biyado lamachos ba'achirim. Anyone who has the ability to object to others, bein rabim bein yichidim, whether the many or the few, or whether the masses or individuals, v'lo micha, and he does not object, ella yaniach osam b'kishlon, he leaves them in their stumbling. Okay, and then the 4th one is ha'omer echtev ashuv, someone who says, I will sin and then I'll do tshuva. Or it says someone who says I'll sin and then Yom Kippur will atone. So to me, he's saying if you have the ability, if your friend is stumbling, it doesn't matter in a technical avera or a bad midah or a bad crowd or a bad philosophical belief, and you have the ability to object in a way that will be received, and you don't, then that is included in this in this category. I don't know if it would fall under the actual technical definition of tochacha, like the technical mitzvah of tochacha, like where you have a chiyuv, but certainly philosophically, it's an avon if you don't do that. Yeah. Okay, good question.
Thank you.
Yep. Next. Yeah, Alex.
My question is, at what point do you allow like Lashon Hara to like color your perception of someone if every time they're brought up, someone immediately says something bad about them that they've done or like a negative quality they have, and you leave the situation, don't participate in Lashon Hara, but like every time they're mentioned it happens.
Okay.
Like at what point do you let that like actually color your perception of them?
Okay, good question. So let me actually, I think Nava also sent a question that was like this. Hold on. Oh no, no, she did not. Someone else asked me another question about that. Forgot who. Yeah, okay, so so the answer is you don't, okay? But like, okay, let me think how I want to put this here. Okay, first of all, let me say that there are halachos about this, okay? And I'm not brushed up on the halachos about this. About like when you are allowed to, let's say, okay, well, first of all, let me make a distinction here, okay? If there is a practical nafkamina, like there's a practical outcome, like let's say you're being told that like so-and-so is, he lies and he cheats, So there are halachos and principles about how to not violate the issur of accepting Lashon Hara, but still like protecting yourself from being harmed by such a person, and I'm not brushed up enough on those to be able to say. But let's just say it's like Lashon Hara that is not going to affect your practical, like that's not going to be for a constructive purpose. Let's say someone's just bad mouthing someone's midos, So I would say like, you should not let this color your perception, and I know that's easy to say and hard to do, but like there are people who are first of all, you could have people who are a lot of people who are wrong, like that's definitely a thing. You could have certain people who they were exposed to such a person in a certain context, and in that context then they are that's where their judgment was formed. Like, let's say, for example, like I'm gonna give you a dumb example, but like high schoolers who have a certain teacher and they say so-and-so is a mean person, well, it's very, very clear that if this person did poorly in this teacher's class and they kept on getting bad grades or was disciplined, then they're going to view this as a mean person. But that should have no bearing on like how this person is outside of the classroom, or maybe even in the classroom. Like it might be that these students had this perception because that was how the teacher was towards them, So it's not indicative of any reality. And the thing also is like, there is a, if someone said something about a food, okay, that, like, let's say they said, oh, I've tried duck and duck is disgusting, we recognize that food is subjective, and that a lot of food also depends on your exposure to food. Like maybe you had really, really bad duck, So I think with people, it's a similar thing, which is that whether you like someone or not is often based on subjective factors, okay? And those subjective factors will express themselves as objective judgments. For example, I know that a lot of people think that Donald Trump is a horrible person, okay? And I know a lot of people who think that Donald Trump is an amazing person, okay? So and the country's divided about that, right? So like a lot of it has to do with whether they like the person or not and what their subjective impressions are. So even though they might express it in objective terms, that's no guarantee that there's actually anything objectively true about it. So I would say you should strive to form your own judgments and to not let those that Lashon Hara taint your impressions, even if it's widespread. Like again, there's also stuff about like timelines. Like there are people who encountered a certain person at a certain stage of that person's life, and then like years later they still are operating with that same version of the person, but maybe that person decided to improve themselves. Maybe they had a near-death experience, that changed things. Maybe they got into a relationship and the relationship changed their mitos, So I think that's another mistake, is that people will form a judgment, and then that judgment becomes like the frozen in time version of that person. And then when they talk about that person, then that's the version they talk about. But we should have the humility to realize that we change a lot throughout time, and just like we change, maybe we should grant other people the possibility that maybe they're changing and maybe they're a different person than the one that we knew. So those are my initial guidelines. Again, I can't go through the halachos because I don't know them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, next. And if we run out, Nava had 2 more questions she sent, but I said I would prioritize the live people. Yeah, Ayala.
Okay, so I guess this is kind of a big question, but how would one respond, I guess, to the argument that the purpose of life is pleasure?
Okay. Good question.
That's it, yeah.
That is a big question. Yeah. How would I respond to someone who says that the purpose of life is pleasure? Okay, so this is going to sound bizarre, okay? And I'm going to take you at your word that your question is how would you respond? Okay, I would advocate that, okay, that the purpose of life is pleasure. And what I would do is I would say that if you take that seriously, then the Torah is going to be the best life. Okay. Now, I'm not the only one who said this. I mean, and I have not looked into this in depth. So like I'm saying this based on hearsay, but Epicurus, right? Who some people think is the root of the word Epicurus. I don't know if that's actually true, but Epicurus, the philosopher, Epicurean. So in modern day parlance, an Epicurean is someone who just likes the finer things in life, like fine foods and wines and clothes and that stuff. But Epicurus was a philosophical hedonist who held that the good in life is pleasure, but from my understanding, what he did is he and his philosophy and his school of philosophy basically said, okay, so let's evaluate the pleasures. And they realized, again, I don't know this firsthand, there's physical pleasures, psychological pleasures, and intellectual pleasures. And they realized that with the physical pleasures, that they're very limited and they're dependent on externals and they have consequences, and they're often wrapped up in like fantasies and stuff. So then they said, okay, well, the psychological pleasures are really on a higher level. And then they analyzed those, and then they said, no, really, the intellectual pleasures are on the highest level. And the statement was, let me see if I can get the actual statement here. It's a witty statement. Oh yeah. So was this a utilitarian? Yeah. Better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. You know, recognizing that like animalistic pleasures are really the lower element of the person, and really the type of pleasure that we should seek is the uniquely human pleasure. And that even being that kind of person who's operating on that plane, even though you might also expose yourself to like lows or whatever, then that's the realm where the real pleasure is at, you know? So this I would advocate because Mishle advocates this. Mishle says, and I'll quote Mishle here so we can see it inside. Just one second, let me just type this on my source sheet. Mishle Gimel. Mishle chapter 3, and this is all throughout Mishle, but I'm going to quote from the concentration of the psukim here. So, you know, unlike Tehillim, where David Melech is talking about the beauty of Torah and the perfection of Torah and how it allows you to serve Hashem, Mishle has a different pitch for being involved in Chachma. So it says, Ashrei Adam Matza Chachma v'Adam Yafik Tvuna. Happy / praiseworthy is a person who has found Chachma, a person who could derive understanding. Kitov Sachra Mischar Kasef. Its commerce is better than the commerce of silver, and its produce is better than gold. It is more precious than pearls or jewels. All your desires can't compare to it. Length of days is at its right hand, at its left is wealth and honor. Okay, and he goes through this, throughout the introductory program of Mishle. Here's another one in chapter 8. So Chachma is talking, and it says, similar thing. Okay, that's not where we am. Oh yeah. So Chachma says, counsel, advice is with me, tushia, whatever that means, is with me. I am understanding. Power belongs to me. Through me, kings reign. And princes make laws. Sarim yasoru. Through me, officers reign. Unadivim kol shofte aretz. Ani ehav umushachar yimsaunni. Osher v'chavoditi, wealth and honor is with me. Hon ate ki utstaka, wealth, old wealth and tzedaka. Tov piri micharus mi paz utuvuasi mikesef nivchar. My fruit is better than fine gold, and like even finer gold and silver things. So Shlomo HaMelech is advocating Chachma not because of how it helps you to serve God or because of any of these lofty reasons, but because all your desires can't compare to it, and it's better than gold. You can do business with it. It'll make you reign and rule. So I would say that, like, you know, if you really are serious, then you should do an investigation of the pleasures, and you know, again, I wouldn't necessarily turn someone loose on their own with this, but I would say that, like, if you do an investigation of the pleasures, you'll find that the pleasures of Torah and Chachma are they outclass the physical pleasures, and then hopefully a person will attach to Torah for that reason. I think D4 is the proof of learning, Shira, where Rashi talks about that.
I wanted to add before I go. Okay, I heard that from like another source that said that's the purpose, but also and I think this is from Rabbi Chait, but I don't want to misquote. He did say that Kohelet says better is in the funeral than in the house of party.
Right.
So he said that ultimately, obviously we should all, pleasure is good, but truth is better. Truth is like it's better for a person to have truth than to be depressed. I mean, better for the person to have truth with depression than I'm pretty sure that's what he said.
Okay, yeah, I mean that definitely is what Kohelet says. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So I know I'm not asking, I don't know if that's the question you were asking. There is another question that you could have been asking, which is how do you like philosophically refute hedonism as a philosophy? that I'd have to think about more.
Okay, yeah, I was more asking that, but I like this answer too.
Okay.
But
Yeah, because and that's the thing also. Let me just bridge the two. Okay, we start off with the feeling that pleasure is the good. Okay, so even if you were to philosophically prove to someone that pleasure is not the good, you're not going to win that way. You're not going to actually, it's not going to be real to them. So thank God, God created a world where Chachma gives you a more pleasurable life. So I think you're going to have to take the Mishlei train anyway, and if you try just doing the philosophical proof, but you don't address the actual like emotions, you're not going to get anywhere. They're not going to change their philosophy. So I think all roads lead to Mishlei in this way, and you could certainly supplementing it with with a philosophical backing would be advantageous, but it's not going to get you there on its own.
yeah, would you say it would be like kind of not, I don't know what, but I guess would be better to also say that like hedonism is ultimately not the best, but, or like say what you just said, but then also say that there is some different ideal, or you think just saying this is fine too?
Good question. Yeah, and this is talking about in the practical, like talking to a person.
I guess, yeah, now that we're talking about that.
Right. I really don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I find myself, this is a question I have of like, to what extent can you escape pleasure, pain? Like I go back and forth on that question. Like, let's say if you were learning Lishma, is that outside of the pleasure, pain principle, or is that just the highest enjoyment, and you're really doing it for the enjoyment? And if the question is, if you are locked into that, that like we can't escape pleasure, pain, I don't know if it pays to say that like to try to refute hedonism or to say that there's something else. I think maybe the more productive route is to say that there are better pleasures out there, and Torah has these pleasures to offer. Yeah.
Even if that's better, like I guess practically and more productively, like for an individual person to think that, but do you think it's an ideal to know that there is some, like philosophically know, even though emotionally this is how you live?
Yeah, definitely. It's, I would say all things being equal, then it's good to know. The question is that going to warp their relationship to Torah? We spent a lot of time on the last 2 Thursday nights talking about how the Torah is not anti-pleasure, but I feel like, again, especially for high school students or for people in Western society in general, for them to feel that it's a choice between Torah and a pleasurable life, that is not a healthy feeling. Like, I think that's going to be counterproductive. So I wonder if saying that for certain people is going to lead to that dichotomy that I feel like I have to choose between a life of pleasure and a life of Torah, whereas what I'm suggesting is saying, no, the life of Torah is a life of pleasure, and your personal standards and ideas of pleasure might not be aligned with that at first, but we can get closer and closer and closer and closer. I think that's less threatening to the psyche. Yeah. Good question. Tough question. Okay. Next. And remember, we're aiming to stop at 12 today. Okay, if no one has a question, I will read one of Nava's questions that she sent. Yeah, Ali, you have one?
Yeah, I have more questions, but should I ask?
Actually, let me just quickly look and see how likely it is that I can answer these. Just 1 second. Oh, okay, yeah. I do want to answer this question. She said, how do you surround yourself with like-minded people who challenge you without creating a bubble for yourself? It is, of course, valuable to talk with people that you don't agree with and engage with. It is, of course, valuable to talk with people you don't agree with and engage with those who have other ideas than you. However, if they begin to overstep or seem a bad influence, where's the line that you stop interacting with them or completely cutting out those with opinions that differ from your own? Okay, so that's the challenge, right? Is how to get outside of the bubble in a healthy way, but not in an unhealthy way, because there's all these, principles and halachos of like, surrounding yourself with tzaddikim and chachamim. Hold on, I'm just gonna make a note of this question. That was question 1. Okay, so yeah, so I don't know, I can't say the best way, but I'll tell you how I've done this, and I don't know to what extent I'm successful, but like I always find that I need to find at least one venue where, like, in an intellectual sphere, I can be exposed to ideas that are not my own, and people who hold by these ideas. And like, the way I say it is, I guess there's two things: keeping my thumb on the pulse of like what people hold and think out there in the Jewish world, and then also exposing myself to like non-Jewish thinkers. And for me, and this shifts throughout my like, you know, from year to year, or you know, throughout my life. So like, for example, there are certain social media groups on Facebook or certain Twitter accounts that I follow just to have exposure to these other ideas and these other discussions. And then the Tim Ferriss podcast is someone who I know he has very, very good taste in thinkers. I don't know if I've said this on a question and answer before, but I always tell myself, if I ever meet Tim Ferriss in real life, just in a casual circumstance, I'm just gonna go up to him and say, "Are you a cannibal?" And he'll say, "What?" I say, "Because you have good taste in people." You know, he really is good at finding people who think very differently in their field. And to me, these two streams of like being exposed to like the discussions and the chatter and other ways of thinking about things in the Jewish world through social media, and then listening to someone, a thoughtful person interviewing other thoughtful people, keeps me like constantly exposed to new ideas and helps me branch out. And I'm saying that, like, I think that is something that it can't substitute for interaction face to face with people who think and live differently, but it also doesn't come with the same risks, you know? So that's how I've done it. Okay. And maybe that's just because I'm not an outgoing person where I'm like out there in the world, like interacting with people of different ideas. So let me pause there. And Tamar, you have something to say or add?
Yeah, I have two questions on what you're saying, I guess.
Sure.
One is, do you think that your advice would be different for someone, like, I guess you personally are very actively involved in learning and teaching like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say someone who learns less.
Right.
So that's one question. And then also like, how can you spell out the premise, which I think is also in Nava's question, of like how and why it's good to get outside your bubble? You know, like what are the benefits that you're trying to get there?
Sure. So the first question is, I would definitely say it depends on who the person is. And I'd say it depends, like intellectually, there are people who are very susceptible to influenced by, just like, there are people like, I always remember the scene. I don't even remember the movie, some indie film where there was some, there was a sheltered Christian who had never thought outside of the church's doctrines, who snuck home and like Googled a question on Google, does God exist? And then was in shock of like reading that there are people who hold that God doesn't exist, and then went off the derrick because of that, you know? So that's an extreme example, but like there are people who are very prone to being intellectually influenced negatively, and also who don't have the network and support system of Rebbeim and Chavrusas and like background in their own learning to be able to like adequately handle these questions. Those people I would not suggest this for. And then there are people who we've talked before about having friends who are not religious or not Jewish. There are people who can have friends like that and not at all be in danger. And then there are people who can be very in danger just by hanging out with people who are not friends, who are not religious. And so that needs to be taken into account 100%. Regarding the question of the unstated premise of the question is, the term for this now is an echo chamber, where everyone who you interact with is only like voicing ideas and beliefs that you agree with. And the problem with it is, if you don't question or challenge your own beliefs, then how do you actually know that they are true? I think that's one premise, is that like maybe this is just what I've only been exposed to things that I agree with, and so therefore like I don't even know, I don't even, like, I can't, there's only so much you can, theoretically, you can question all of your own beliefs. But the question is, are you actually going to do that? And are you going to do that with the proper rigor? And also, do you know what the alternatives are? There's a good sforno. Well, there's many good sfornos, but there's a sforno on Biadata Hayom. Vashvoza Elavavecha. I just don't know where that pasuk is. And I'll write this down in my thing here. I find it. Yeah. Sforno on Dalid 39 in Devarim. Sforno Devarim Dalid 39. So the pasuk says, "V'yadata hayom v'hashavosa elavavecha." You shall know today and take it to your heart. Ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shmayim al v'aharis mitachas enod. That Hashem is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. There's none other, or there's nothing else. So Sforno, I think it's Sforno on this, says, "V'yadata hayom im kain roi b'li safek shetisbonin v'teda kol chelke hasoser." You should, without a doubt, it's proper for you to understand and to know all of the contrary opinions. Okay. I just want to double check that that's how to translate it. I'll be right back. I know I said this recently, but I'm going to say it again. So this is the obligatory book commercial. Do not use the Sforno on Al Torah, because that's Rabbi Eliyahu Monk, who doesn't actually translate. He does jazz. Okay, he riffs on what they say, but he doesn't actually translate. But the Pelkovitz edition of Sforno, Rabbi Pelkovitz, does have a good translation. So the way he translates it is 39. Therefore, it is without doubt fitting that you contemplate and know all the contradictory parts of theoretical speculation. Yeah, and then let's look at the shirim of the Sforno. Oh, we don't have it here. Okay, fine. And then he also says, then after contemplation, you should take to heart what is true that comes from these things. So the idea is you have to put your ideas to the test, and again, you should only do this if you're ready for it, but you should you should be able to know why this is true according to the alternatives, but you can only do that if you actually examine the alternatives. And I think, okay, let me go one more Sforno and see if this is true. In Migdal Bavel, I'll write the source if it needs to be. Vayhi chol ha'aretz safa echad u'devarim achadim. So the entire earth was one language and unified principles. So on the surface, that sounds like it's not so bad. And I've given a share on this before, that if you actually read the psukim, it doesn't actually say that they did anything bad. You could say it alludes to it and stuff. So the question is, what was so bad about this generation? So I think the Sforno says, so Hashem actually states, V'yomer Hashem, behold, this is one people and one language for all of them, and this they have begun to do. And now it will not be withheld from them that which they have conspired to do. So what does that mean? So Sforno says, Ki amnam habitul hamefer atas hagoyim umeni machshavos hu hamachlokes hakore b'neihem. He says I'm going to actually consult the Rabbi Palkovitz version. The bittul I'm going to read this here. This is pasuk 6. He says, normally the council of nations and their plans are thwarted and nullified as a result of divisions which occur between them. Who machlokas hakore b'neihem is the machlokas that is between them. Im l'sibas hadasos, whether because of religions, v'im l'sibas halashonos, or because of language. V'hine ela. But these guys, hayu am echad b'inyan hadas, they were unified in religion. Ki hayu kulam maskimim b'da'as anshe hatzava'a, they all were followers of avodah zarah. V'im zeh hayu kulam maskimim b'lashon, and then that's why they all were agreement in lashon. So, hold on. Yeah. So he says, so why does God want to disperse them? He says, Im kain ein moneh lahem mehashlim kavanasam. There's nothing that's going to prevent them from bringing to fruition their intent. V'tiyeh osa avodah zarah asher yibcharu klalis l'chol min ha'adam. And then that avodah zarah that they've chosen will become, will spread to the entirety of mankind. V'lo yifne echad mehem ladas es habori yisbarach u'lahavin ki yotzer hakol hu. None of them will know the creator of everything and to understand that he created everything. The hefech zeh yikare kashiti machlokes bein ha'umos b'inyan Elohe hanechar. But if there's a machlokes between the nations about their avodah zarah, then that will actually create the possibility for this to happen. Ki kol achas mehem mehena tachshov sheyesh Elohe Eloheha Elohim Shekol ha'elohos maskim ladato. Everyone will think that there's a superior God that all the other gods are inferior to, that he believes in. Ubo yishlam sidram umitiusam. So the argument he's making, according to my understanding, is this whole society following one avodah zarah. If that were the case, then no one would be able to break out of it. But if you have machlokes and diversity of opinion, even diversity of false opinion, that will cause them to challenge each other's opinions, and that will lead to the possibility of someone discovering the truth. So I think sforno in Devarim and sforno here give two reasons why it's possible to expose yourself, why it's good to expose yourself to different beliefs. Is if you have the true belief, you need to actually make sure that you can defend it and that you know why it's true. And the only way you can do that is subjecting it to other opinions. And if, let's say you're in an echo chamber and it's totally false beliefs. So I was just watching this documentary called Cult of Cults about the Heaven's Gate cult. And, part of their cult, and which is true of many cults, is you cut yourself off from all other people who hold differently from you. So if, let's say there's always a possibility you're in an echo chamber brainwash group, you need to expose yourself to people in order to get you to disbelieve in what you believe, and so that's another reason to expose yourself to other people. So I think that was the premise of Nava's question. Okay, so obviously there's a lot more to be said on all of these, like on every Q&A, but I got to go now, and that was good Q&A, good questions. Thank you for that. That was fun. So I'm just thinking we have one more week before a Shavuos Friday, right? I think. So I don't know what I want to do. I know there's a lot of stuff that's on the back burner. Like I still want to give a shir on V'ahavta Kamocha. Lashon Hara thing I'm not going to give the shir on now. And there were a couple of other requests. What was the one that someone gave a good request that I said? Oh yeah, teaching Torah to non-Jews. I'm still working on preparing that, but I don't know if it'll be done in time by next week. So we'll see. But thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Have a good
Thank you.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.